So yeah, if everyone can start to make their seats, I think we're good to go, aren't we? Yeah, here we go. So, it's good to see everyone back on day 3, I guess now. Yeah. My name's Josh, and I'll be chairing this session. It is From Trump to Netanyahu, Modi to Milei, Understanding the Rise of the Global Far Right. I'll introduce our panelists in a moment. First up, some important information for your convenience. Toilets can be accessed to the door on the right of me, if you haven't found them yesterday. Drinks and snacks can be accessed at the back, at the door at the back. Green Left and Socialist Alliance is the host of this conference, my good friends. And if you are inspired to become a socialist activist, you can either join us or stay in touch. We're all here. We've all come along. We've got tickets. But please reach out if you want to stay in more contact. We also have a session, Intro to Socialism, right after this in the back room over here to the left. Welcome along to ask questions as well. We're holding this conference on the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people. The land was never ceded, and always was and always will be Aboriginal land. The Socialist Alliance stand in solidarity with Indigenous people in the ongoing fight for freedom from incarceration, land rights and genuine material sovereignty. We have 2 wonderful speakers today. Clifton D'Rozario. Clifton is of the Communist Party, Marxist-Leninist Liberation, he's a campaigner for Dalit rights in Karnataka state, India. And speaking first, we have Mariana Riscali from Brazil. Mariana Riscali is from the Socialist Left movement, part of the Socialism and Liberation Party, PSOL, in Brazil. She's a member of PSOL's National Executive Committee and Executive Director of the Lauro, Campos and Marielle Franco Foundation. And she'll be speaking up first. I just want to say a few words to start. So, I drove on the way here today. I was driving and I heard a clunk on the roof of the car, and I stopped to grab my cup of coffee, which had slid across the roof of my car and was sitting on resting against the roof rack. So I feel it's going to be a good day. I got my coffee, didn't spill a drop, and so I hope it's okay. I just want to say a few words. I don't speak much to Marxist theory. I don't have that huge knowledge, but I can speak about myself. And I come from a deeply conservative background. And this is about the rise of the far right. And, my life has been the rise of me as a progressive. So I just speak to that a little bit. And it's thanks to the people in my life, my friends, some from the LGBT community. I've got a radical auntie. I've got Mari, who campaigned with me, a Christian radical, who campaigned with me from The Voice. And my comrades from the Progressive No as well. This year, I found my people in the Socialist Alliance. Yeah. Dedicated people like Sam and Janet, who've had a sustained commitment to this movement and have made a lot of sacrifices So join Socialist Alliance if you it's a great movement. Also people who we heard from yesterday have made great sacrifices, like Linda. Someone online that was kind of part of my radicalization, I would say, is Michael Brooks, who had a close understanding and relationship with Lula in Brazil as well. So I am really interested to hear today about that, from that perspective, and the rise of the far right, and the recent re-election of Modi, and Albanese's fawning over Modi when he comes in here. Shame. So I'm really interested to hear from Clifton and Mariana today. I'd also like to thank all the people come here from interstate, and the commitment and solidarity I've seen from so many people. It's been amazing so far, and I think it will continue today. So thank you. Yeah, please, a round of applause for these people. Just a few more things. A fun fact about for myself. Me and my friends, back in the day, we drove a car from Perth to Chennai. We shipped a car from Perth to Chennai in South India and drove it to the UK. So it was a real privilege to be able to do that. The far right, despite having this privilege, far right people, the far right movement is hyper fixated on immigration, yet we can have so much mobility ourselves. And I remember when I got to Europe, being on a bus with a young Palestinian woman and sharing my thoughts at that time, the Josh from 2008 on Israel and Palestine. And I empathized with this woman who had to justify her existence and the reality of living under a brutal occupation and apartheid. Someone who now I would call a bit of a right-wing ding-dong. And it was a slow journey. But today there's this sudden jolt of people being uncomfortable. I had that benefit of having a slow progression. And so in this sudden jolt of things that are happening, will people move to the far right or open up and be inclusive and join this progressive movement? So I would like to ask now, a warm round of welcome for Mariana Riscali.
Oh, hi, good morning. Can you hear me well? It's okay? Yes. Yeah? Okay, so good morning for you all. Good evening here, because in Brazil, it's still Saturday in the evening. My name is Mariana Riscali. I am from São Paulo, Brazil, and I have been a member of Socialist and Liberation Party since its foundation in 2004. Our party stands independently to the left of the PT, the Workers' Party of the President Lula. And within the PSOL, which is the Socialist and Liberation Party, I am part of the Socialist Left movement, which is an internal tendency within PSOL. And I'm also executive director of the Lauro Campos and Marielle Franco Foundation, which is a foundation related to education, research, and publishing about socialism. It is a foundation related to PSOL, which produces educational and literature about socialism. So first, I'd like to thank you all. Thanks to the Socialist Alliance, and especially for Fred Fuentes, who invited me to be here with you, and which has already came to Brazil to our MES conference the past year. It is a great opportunity to be here and to talk to you in this debate today. I had the opportunity to be in Australia many years ago, but I still have friends in the country, so I'm very glad to be here today and talking to you. So it's important when we talk about the rise of the far right, to understand that this is not an isolated phenomenon. It is part of a global situation. So we cannot discuss this issue without today acknowledging the most critical aspect of the rise of the far right, which is the situation in Palestine, because thousands of people are being massacred by the genocidal government of Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. And this is a situation that goes beyond a mere conflict between peoples or a territorial dispute, because Netanyahu today stands as one of the leading figures of the far right in the world. He represents a program of the far right. So also across the globe, we have witnessed the growth of the far right organizations around the world, organizations, parties, and movements. And the most recent example of this was seen in the European Parliament elections. Even before the European Parliament elections, there had already been a rise in the influence of such organizations in Europe. We can talk about the Alternative for Germany, which openly flirts with neo-Nazi ideals, and that has been growing in Germany, even reaching some chairs in their parliament. Recently, also the Chega party in Portugal that had a great influence and grew in their recent elections. And in Italy, the Brothers of Italy, that it is one of the most representative of the far right also in Italy. So it was a trend developing in Europe, which was confirmed during the European Parliament elections, where the right wing advanced in countries like France, Austria, the Netherlands, and gained more space and more seats in the European Parliament. And to talk closer to Brazil here in Latin America, the most recent example was the election of Javier Milei, who ran and who was elected with an ultra-liberal platform, advocating for severe cuts in public spending, mass layoffs, and a huge erosion of rights, and with a program against feminism, against the LGBTQ movements. So a very, very severe exponent of the far right. In the United States, of course, we are all following it closely, how there is a great risk of Donald Trump being elected again and returning to the presidency, despite of how catastrophic was his previous term. But he's still likely to win in the next elections. And this is a situation that we all follow very closely, not only because of the significant influence of the United States in the world, but for us here in Brazil, there is a parallel what occurs in United States and what even might occur here in Brazil, because we had experience under a far-right government, which was Bolsonaro government. And that is what I want to talk to you about Bolsonaro and about Lula, because I think it was, and it is very important to analyze what happened in Brazil and what's still happening. As you are aware, before Lula was elected in 2022, we had 4 terrible years under Bolsonaro government in Brazil. Bolsonaro was elected with a far-right agenda and with huge military support, promoted liberal economic policies, showed complete disdain for the environment and for Amazon forests and for our indigenous communities. He targeted women, Black people, the LGBTQ population, and represented a huge attack to our democratic freedoms. Also doing that as an aggressive campaign against communism and the rise of communism. And to get worse, we experienced his government during the pandemic years, and where he promoted campaigns against isolation. He was totally anti-vax and contributed to the avoidable deaths of hundreds of thousands of people that could have been avoided, and unfortunately happened because of the role he played during the pandemics. So even when Bolsonaro was defeated in the last elections, he tried to still keep in power. And similar to what happened in the United States with the Capitol invasion that happened in January of 2021, we faced a similar invasion of the palaces here of the legislative, executive, and judicial in our capital, Brasilia, in January 2023. The far right with Bolsonaro orchestrated, they tried to orchestrate a coup, and investigations reveal that he was leading this attempt to a coup in Brazil, which happily they failed. But even though we successfully defeated Bolsonaro at the polls by electing Lula in 2002, and we also defeated his attempt of a coup, we say that we still must remain vigilant, because what we call Bolsonarism continues to have significant power in Brazil. So Lula's victory was by a very narrow margin in the second round, with under of 2% of difference of the votes. And many of Bolsonaro supporters were elected as governors and especially as legislators. So they still have a very significant political influence, especially in our Congress. So we can say that although we defeated Bolsonaro, we cannot say that we defeated Bolsonarism as a movement and as a power in our country. And in our belief, this happens not only in Brazil, but in the world, because we are undergoing a very big crisis of hegemony and of political references in the world. So since we are facing an economic crisis, a massive environmental crisis, as you well know, I know is one of the most important themes of your conference and of the left nowadays, where we face the effects of global warming that's also even more pronounced. Here in Brazil, we had a recent process of huge floodings in Porto Alegre and in the Rio Grande do Sul state. As you must have seen in the TV, there was almost the whole state was covered by the floods. So beyond this situation, the left sometimes struggle to present itself as a viable alternative. And in a vacuum of power, and in a context of disillusionment with the politicians, with the system, this context allows the far right to emerge sometimes as a radical and as an anti-system alternative. And this phenomenon was evident in Argentina, where the center left was previously in power. It occurred in Portugal, where Portugal was being governed under the Socialist Party. And it may also be manifested in the United States, where although the Democratic Party, we cannot say is the leftist party, but at the same time, the Democratic Party with Biden government has been failing to present themselves as an alternative that can resolve the crisis of the capitalism and that can improve the working class lives. So the challenges for the socialist left in this context is, of course, in first moment, when confronting the far right, we cannot be sectarian. We have to build unity in the left, opposing the far right and defending democracy. And that's why in Brazil, we, PSOL, as PSOL, were part of a wider front with the democratic sectors and with the broader left, with PT, the Workers' Party, to defeat the menace of Bolsonaro and of the far right. But at the same time, as socialists, as truly socialists and as radical socialists, it is fundamental for us to maintain our independence, the class independence, and the fidelity to our program, to the left program. Because sometimes during these critical moments when the right is rising, some part of the left, they justify diluting our program in a response to the right's advance and to the right's advance, as we could not be as radical to our program because that would be prejudicial for us in the struggle against the right. But we believe that it is the opposite, that in these moments when the far right is rising, that is just crucial for us to be really loyal to our principles and to demands of the workers, to demands of the social movements, to organize the struggle. And even within PSOL, we are having such a dilemma as the parties, the PSOL is a party with a lot of different fractions inside of the party. And the dominant fraction, that it is the majority today, under this analysis of the Brazilian situation, sometimes they stay critical to the Lula's government. And sometimes they fail to make PSOL seem different and more loyal to the Workers' Party, to the working class principles and to the working class demands. Because Lula was elected as a coalition with the center, with also the center and with democratic sectors. And that's why most of the time, PT and Lula, they cannot attend the workers' demands. And most of the time, they have been pressured by the center and by the business sectors or the financial sectors to attend their demands. And as the socialists left, we have to be loyal to our principles and defend our program. So that's why we defend that PSOL has to be, although we support Lula's government when it needs to face the far right, at the same time, we have to have independence to criticize the government when it is needed, and we have to be independent to promote the program that we defend for the working class, as the distribution of the wealth, as taxes on the super riches, and defending the environment and the indigenous people. So that's a program that PSOL defends, that we believe it has to be defended, even when Lula government is not defending these issues, because we understand that if at some point Lula's government starts to build a disillusionment with the people, and that already happened even because Lula was the president for 2 terms some years ago. And when at that time, the Lula government is passing through a disillusionment with the working class because could not present itself as a leftist alternative. If there is not an alternative of power being presented, and we believe that PSOL can be this alternative, the radical sectors, and not only the radical sectors, but the ones who are disillusioned with Lula and with the PT, can sometimes be convinced by the far right that the far right has been more radical, and then it can present more radical alternatives towards the system. And regarding to that, we think it is significant to revisit a debate that was initiated by Rosa Luxemburg among the German socialists in the early 20th century on her book, Reform or Revolution. Because Luxemburg, she argued that fighting for reforms within capitalism, when pursued consistently, was a task for the revolutionaries, because the capitalists are inherently incapable of pursuing reforms that extends right. And on the contrary, revolutionaries advocating for a reform program can not only gain significant popular support, mobilizing the masses to defend their rights, but we can always also show the masses that when they cannot achieve these reforms, it is because of the capitalism system. So bringing them to struggle and to build the movement and the resistances also helps to elevate the mass consciousness by revealing the limitations of the capitalism and emphasizing the importance of the mobilization and building a revolutionary organization, not only within the institutional politics, but especially within the street mobilizations and the organization of the revolutionary sectors. So we believe this discussion transcends the institutional politics. The street mobilization, it is indispensable. It is as it serves as a vital tool for resistance. So in recent months in Brazil, as an example, we can talk about a significant strike of federal employees that began with the university workers and ended up involving professors of the universities and even students of the universities that were struggling for adjustments of their salary and the improvement on public higher education. They were negotiating with the government because it was a federal sector that negotiated directly with federal government about their salaries. And Lula's government was offering them 0% of adjustment on their salaries. And they were of a huge example on how to build the mobilization, and they could, in the end, win and gain improvement of their salaries because they remained for more than 3 months building this very important strike on all over the country, in more than 60 universities all over the country, and advocating for their rights even under Lula's government. So it was an example of how it is important to be mobilized even in this situation. And PSOL was very important on building this mobilization because PSOL has an important construction on the public sector. And more recently, the women that have been a sector that have led mobilizations worldwide. Here in Brazil, in the past few weeks, they took the streets to protest against a major setback proposed by the right wing in our Congress regarding to our abortion law. And it was very important because women took the streets all over the country and the proposal was withdrawn. It was defeated rapidly because women took over all the streets again against this proposal. So we think that this principle, such as continual mobilization and internationalism, are perspectives that connect the existing struggle on a global scale. And that's also why we are very attentive and engaged to the struggles in Argentina, due their history of activism and street mobilization, because we believe Argentina can represent a very important example on how to fight the far right. These early months of Milei government in Argentina already witnessed significant demonstrations, strikes, a massive women's mobilization that happened on March 8th. And we were present, sending delegations from the Socialist left movement and from PSOL to engage in all those Argentine struggle process, because we believe they are also an example to be followed. And that's why also we believe the support on the cause of the Palestine, it is a very important struggle that has to be also an example. I had the opportunity to visit the United States recently at Labor Notes Conference, which is a very important conference of left-wing workers and independent workers and left-wing unions. And it coincided with the surge of the university occupations for a ceasefire in Palestine. So I could be there and I could witness some of the occupations. I could participate of some of the occupations, which mobilized the youth, and not only around the conflict of the Palestine itself, but with a very radical perspective, even an anti-capitalist perspective, we can say. So it was very important to forge a new generation of activists, of critical activists, of anti-capitalist activists that played a very important role worldwide in shaping the public opinion about the Palestine cause, and even on challenging the Biden government, which saw a decline on its support amongst the youth because of his alignment with the Israelis' interests and with Benjamin Netanyahu. So it also played a very important role internationally on showing how the mobilization is important to build our demands. So so that my time is also getting in the time, and I would like to finish in saying that all the examples are examples on how, if in one hand the right-wing progression, it is global, on the other hand the process of resistance are also global. And that's why forums like this one, I'm being part today and debating with you, even being here in Brazil, and with the opportunity of being online, gathering with you all to debate how we can combine our experiences of resistance, of struggles. Here in Brazil, we were building an important initiative that unfortunately was postponed because of the floods that happened in Rio Grande do Sul. That was the first international anti-fascist conference, where we were trying to put together a very important amount of leftist organization to organize this international resistance. Unfortunately, we had to postpone it because Rio Grande do Sul, it was also a victim of how the capitalism is even more and more destroying the environment, but it also was an example of how we need to be connected also to the struggles. And I hope that soon we can reorganize it and we can have another date for it to happen. And I'm sure it will be very important that you all are also connected with this process, because I think it's only by uniting and mobilizing the fighters all around the world that we can advance towards overcoming capitalism and building a socialist world. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It is a pleasure, and I look forward to hearing from you all, so we can also exchange some information and debate collectively on how to build our demands and how to build socialism together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariana, and thanks for joining us so late at night over there. And I hope you're able to understand. If you are able to hang around for questions, that's so. Thank you so much for being here. So we will have questions at the end after our next speaker, Clifton. Thank you for as well, Marianne, so succinctly talking about the right-wing movement across the world, the importance of alliance, and providing critical perspectives in Brazil, with a left-leaning party. I'll just say about the movement that PSOL is doing, and how the students are essential to that. And we've seen the same thing in movements here recently. And someone said to me the other day, it's always been that way. This is not new. It's always that way. The young people being pushing back. So we'll come questions after this. And next we have Clifton D'Rozario. And can you all give him a warm welcome? Thank you very much.
Hi, morning everyone. I think this warm welcome was very required in this cold Perth. I'm just coming from 40, 45 degree temperatures in India. So this is little bit unbearable. I was actually thinking, in terms of what to share with you all. And I was telling Fred a little worried about that, in the sense that, it's so wide, this topic, when you talk about the globe, this global rise of the right wing. So I put down some thoughts, and I'm just hoping to share this with you with the hope that we actually have some kind of a discussion. And of course, this is a discussion that has to continue. I'm most grateful to Mariana. She actually has laid out the kind of terrain rather in very detailed way. Just on this parliamentary elections, I'm sure all of you followed what happened in Europe. And the largest bloc is the conservative right bloc. The second largest bloc is the far right bloc. So in effect, they are the biggest powers in the European Parliament today. And it's very interesting what Geert Wilders, who's one of Dutch far right kind of politician, his line after these elections, after the results came out, was that the genie is out of the bottle. I think we need to understand that. The genie is truly out of the bottle. And it's not just Europe. Like Mariana said also, you look at what's happening in South America, you look at what's happening in Asia, the country that I come from, what's happening over there, and you realize that this is truly a global phenomena. The far right, the right wing, whatever you want to call them, they're a very formidable political force today. And understanding it and dealing with it, I would imagine, is really absolutely essential for us. The one thing, though, that I'd like to add here is that what is this context? The context for the emergence of this global right wing is global neoliberalism. And it's a neoliberalism where capital is in a very serious crisis. And we're not just talking about the 2008 kind of a crisis. It's a crisis that has been recurring throughout. And it's a crisis where you're seeing capital fight back in a far more vicious way than we've seen before. So if neoliberalism meant that you dismantled the welfare state, you obliterated the gains that the working class, got through its struggles over the last 150 years, if it meant decimation of people's lives, climate change, for instance, the entire extractive kind of industries, it's also meant a very, very serious undermining of democracy. So that's the kind of context in which you're seeing these kinds of, right-wing governments across the country, across the world. And of course, the interesting thing which, I wanted to point out is the collaboration that happens between them. There was a time when you'd say, like, for instance, look at Palestine. I think Palestine is really it's heartbreaking what's happening over there. It's very inspiring, the resistance there and elsewhere. But look at the kind of collaboration that's happening between regimes that enables that genocide. So you can have the ICJ with its orders. You can have the United Nations with its resolutions. You can have all of that on the one hand. But on the other hand, you have a collaboration, a very deep collaboration at every level. And it's not just financial, it's diplomatic, it's military, it's in every which way, in propaganda. That collaboration that happens at a very global level, which is something that I feel, that we need to take a little more seriously. The second thing that I wanted to they're just points, right? When we talk about the far right, it's like such a wide spectrum. And I think one needs to be a little conscious of that in a big way. Like where I come from, we say that it's a fascist regime in India. Now, I've seen a lot of people, eyebrows go up, like, how can that be fascism? I think that may not be the right way for us to look at. In fact, Comrade Lynn, I can't see her. Yeah. When she was speaking about Singapore yesterday, I'm really looking forward to, attending the session today as well. How does one even understand that kind of an authoritarian regime? Or do I call it an authoritarian regime? What else do I call it? So I think when you talk about this global far right, it's such a wide spectrum from anti-democratic kind of regimes all the way to a fascist kind of regime. And it could be anything. It could be a racist regime. It could be a regime that's really populist in that sense. It could be a regime that is nativist as well. Or it could be a regime that's just illiberal. So I think for us, we really need to spend a little more time trying to understand what do you mean by that? Because if you're not able to understand the nature of the regime, then you're not going to understand the nature of the collaboration or the kind of resistance that actually is required. Having said that, I feel that, one of the things that we've been trying to understand is, especially when we were trying to understand the situation in India, a lot of left parties and a lot of, even other bourgeois democratic parties, they felt that, okay, see, this is like an authoritarian kind of government. Narendra Modi, the BJP, it's an authoritarian kind of regime. But we went a step further a few years ago and said, see, this is the onset of fascism in India. And the reason we said that was, there are certain features of these kinds of regimes which one has to really identify. And then when you identify those kind of features, then I think it becomes a little easier for us. So for instance, if you look at all the regimes across the world, what you're calling the far right kind of regimes, you'll notice some amount of populism. Populism, everyone knows, and that's what Marianne actually spoke about, where actually the right wing emerges as some kind of a viable alternate, in fact, a radical alternative to the so-called liberal Democrats. It's because that vacuum exists, whatever the reason may be. But the fact is that they do that. So Trump, in fact, I couldn't even believe it. The man he has buildings called Trump Towers, for God's sake. And then he's like, I'm your answer to the fight against the elite. You are the elite. But that's what populism does. And that is such an essential kind of an element that you would find to various degrees. Obviously, I'm not making this as an absolutist kind of a statement. You'll find it to various degrees, but this is definitely something that you find. And you'll also find nationalism. This notion of, and of course, nationalism is the bedrock of populism. That I think all of us understand. And it's premised on a kind of a nativism, that we are the original inhabitants, so this country is ours. And how does that then translate today? It's xenophobia, it's Islamophobia, it's all of that. It's a different matter altogether that you probably were the first migrants into this land. So if you're in Australia and you're saying that, see, I am irritated that somebody from Syria is coming here. I'm like, I don't know where that's coming from. Because the indigenous people here, the First Nations people, they have much to say about that. So even this nativist, this kind of nationalist kind of a twist that you give, it's a very problematic kind of a notion. But it does exist. And that becomes the basis then for this kind of xenophobia, the kind of Islamophobia that you're seeing. And of course, there's this total intolerance for any kind of diversity. And that, I think, is really, this multiculturalism, that it's an anathema for any kind of a far-right kind of a regime. So if you look at certain features, you'll find these features in these various regimes all across the country, but to varying kind of degrees. But I think there are three characteristics which I think we need to, on which there won't be much debate. All these regimes are in defense of capitalism. All of them. And the kind of capitalism that we're seeing, the neoliberal kind of economic policies, they will viciously defend it. Whatever their arguments are, their populist positioning, their posturing of being, nationalist, they will sell your country. They will sell your people. They will destroy the environment, all in the defense of capital. That is one feature which is unaltering insofar as any of these regimes are concerned. The second is a categorical rejection of any kind of democracy or democratic values. This I don't need more to say. I mean, you even open your mouth and you'll be called an anti-nationalist. You say that, okay, hey, indigenous people, they probably, we need to think about it. I mean, it's heartbreaking. Yesterday, the panel that happened in the morning, it's heartbreaking. It's also very angering that, that kind of an oppression is still tolerated and is still possible. But I'll come to that later. I have a bit to say about that. But broadly, the second feature would be this rejection of any notion of democracy or democratic values. And the third, and which I think is a very crucial element, is that all of these regimes are backed up by a power on the streets. It's a street mobilization. It's a public mobilization that kind of, then ends up in some kind of a electoral kind of a victory. Sorry, I'm not trying to be lecturish over here, but I just feel that we need to understand some of these elements, like where I come from. If you don't understand that these regimes are backed up by a mob, that is problematic, because this mob is not just the mob that's going and voting these parties to power. This is the mob that can enter into my house tomorrow and lynch me, which is what it's done. Since Modi came back to power for the third time, there have been at least a couple or three of lynchings where people have been killed, Muslims have been killed because they eat a particular kind of food, beef. So these mobs are essential for this kind of regimes. Like I said, for us, we are really facing a big battle in our country. You have this idea of, the democratic idea, the constitutional idea of India being set aside, and you have this Hindu majoritarian, a very religious majoritarian kind of state that is trying to be propped up over there. Of course, if I have to talk about that, I'm going to take much time, but some pointers. This is an ideology that India is, this Hindu majoritarian state, is a 100-year kind of a ideology. It has a long history. It has an entire apparatus that's thought about this. So you have an organization called the RSS. Some of you may have heard of this. It's called the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which basically is a Hindu majoritarian organization. Mr. Narendra Modi is part of that organization. His party is the political wing of that organization. So the past 100 years, even when India was fighting the British, this particular organization said, hey, there are actually different enemies of this country. So this is a book which one of their ideologues have written. It's called Bunch of Thoughts. A very nice title. But, so in that book, which is written pre-independence, they identify the three internal enemies of Bharat, according to them. Number 3 are the Christians. Number 2 are the Muslims. And number 1 is not the British, it's the communists. So when India was fighting for independence, these guys were sitting and saying, hey, you all are fighting the wrong battle. The battle is against these three. We get rid of these three and then everything is going to be hunky-dory. This glorious past that we've had is going to be recovered. Now that's the ideology that's ruling in this country today. And very interesting, I want to I'll move on because I wanted to share this thing with you, something that I've been doing a little bit of reading of. That if you look at this kind of collaboration that's happening across these regimes, you'll also, I would say, we'd also understand that there's a lot of parallels between the ideologies. So it's fascinating to know that Hindutva, the ideology, this very fascist kind of ideology in India, draws its great inspiration from Zionism on the one hand and Nazism on the other hand. It couldn't be more ironic than that. And I'll just give you a few things on this. So basically, Theodor Herzl, all of us know about the Jewish state, all of us have read that. We've understood, that's where Zionism kind of, flows from, the notion of Israel, born to some extent, or at least crystallized in that particular book. That leads up, this was written in the late 19th century. It becomes quite popular in the 20th century, when, you have this entire movement. And that ends in the Balfour kind of declaration in 1917, which basically says, okay, Palestine, you're going to create a Israel over there. So that's generally it. You'll be amazed to know that one of the biggest Hindutva ideologues was so fascinated by Zionism, he actually quotes it in his books at that time, in the 1920s. So, and the reason this happens, if you look at, say, Zionism and Hindutva, there are three elements of it which I think which there is that commonality, this parallels in their ideologies. There's the notion of a race supremacy, there's a politicization of a religion, and there's an idea that a nation can be built on the basis of a single identity. So Hindutva and Zionism are actually so parallel when you look at it that way. So what does Savarkar say? And I'm talking about 1930s, 1940s. These are things that he had to say. He says, Savarkar is a Hindutva ideologue. If the Zionist dreams are ever realized, if Palestine becomes a Jewish state, it will gladden us almost as much as our Jewish friends. So today when you look at the kind of bonhomie between Netanyahu and Modi, this ideology is for the last 100 years has actually built up to this movement. It's not something that suddenly happened where some agreement has been signed. This is the ideological kind of a closeness that they feel. It's surprising now. Who else did the Hindutva? Where else does Hindutva draw its influence from? The second influence that it has is Mussolini. So in 1930s, another ideologue of Hindutva actually visited Italy, visits Mussolini, goes to all of its various establishments that it has, in particular visits Mussolini's youth organization, and then comes back, the Balila, and so comes back and then he writes this. He says, the Balila institutions and the conception of the whole organization have appealed to me most, though there is still not discipline and organization of high order. The whole idea is conceived by Mussolini for the military regeneration of Italy. Italians by nature appear easy-loving and non-martial, just like us Indians. This is in the 1930s. And then you go on to see what they write about Nazism. So 1940, again Golwalkar, another ideologue of the RSS, he writes, to keep up the purity of the race and its culture, Germany shocked the world by purging the country of the Semitic races, that is the Jews. Race pride at its highest has been manifested here. Germany has also shown how impossible it is for races and cultures having differences going to the root to be assimilated into one united whole. A good lesson for us in Hindustan to learn and profit by. So I'm saying that these ideological kind of parallels, it's just uncanny and it's extremely worrisome. So when you're saying that these right-wing regimes are collaborating today, they're not doing that in thin air. There's an entire understanding of capital that they have, which kind of course, draws them together. But beyond that, there are also other parallels in the ideologies which bring them together. Okay, I think I'm taking too much time. No, I'm fine? Okay. Now I'll just come to the last part. All this is fine, and I think coming from, we just come off this elections in our country. It's been a disastrous 10 years. And in more ways than one, society has been, the kind of social fabric, the kind of secular fabric that the nation had has been devastated in more ways than one. You've also had simultaneously the kind of capitalist exploitation, which was, of course, it's always been there, but the level to which it's gone now is just unprecedented. And like I said, we kind of identify this to be a moment which is not ordinary. The BJP, which is the political wing of the RSS, is not just another bourgeois party. It's not just another, threat. This is a very different moment where the very idea of what our nation stands for was a threat. So keeping that in mind, our party, we kind of initiated this process of, okay, now how do we fight back? So I think I want to just share a little of that with you, because it's okay to know things are bad, but it's always better to know that they can be defeated as well. And I think there are certain things that have happened over the past decade in our country which really, I think that's like absolutely inspiring. So we've had, one of the things that the BJP did was to try and make changes in laws which make capitalist exploitation much more easy. And one of the sectors that they specifically targeted was the agricultural sector. So they came in with these 3 laws, which basically meant like your Adani, it's like an Adani law, you can actually call it. This law would have meant that Adanis could have taken over the entire agriculture business altogether. But the farmers said they had a different view on this. So you had 3 lakhs. Do you understand lakhs? Nah. 300,000. 300,000 farmers marched to the city of Delhi, which is the capital of the country. They marched there in their tractors and with their vehicles and said that till you take those laws back, we're not going to go back. And they picketed the capital for 1 year. They were encampments that you're talking about. We had encampments which were 30 kilometers long, 40 kilometers long on the highway. Entire highways were blocked. They just sat there and said, till you take those laws back, we're not going to go back. So what did the government do, the Modi government do? The Modi government blocked all entries to the capital. And when I mean blocked, barricaded it with those huge cement kind of things that you put on the center of the road. They put nails, like you have those nails, those beds of nails. So beds of nails for meters of fence so that no vehicle can pass through. Water cannons were used on farmers. So when the farmers were stopped at the borders, they said, very well, we'll sit here. So they sat. They sat for 1 year. More than 800 farmers lost their lives because of the cold, because of the rain, because of the heat, but they did not leave. So they sat there, and finally, after a year, the Modi government had to withdraw all the 3 laws. That's like the most brilliant success that the farmers, they showed. That's fine. We can put you down. Similarly, you had this. One of the things that this regime has done is to encode Hindutva into the law. Israel has a particular law called the law of return. I'm sure some of you may know of that. That's the law that enables any Jewish person anywhere in the globe to go and settle in Israel. It doesn't matter. So the Palestinians don't have the right, but any Jewish person, by virtue of that law, can go and live there. Now, India's very inspired by that law. So what they did was they brought in a law called the Citizenship Amendment Act, which basically communalized, gave a religious tone to citizenship in our country. It didn't exist that way. So broadly, what the government did was it said that, see, the neighboring countries around India, the Hindus are facing a lot of oppression. So we are going to allow them to come in and take citizenship in our country. We said that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But it's not just the Muslims, it's not just the Hindus are being targeted. The Ahmadiyas are being targeted in Pakistan. You look at what's happening to the Hindu Tamils in Sri Lanka. So let all of them come in. Why are you giving a religious tone to it? But of course, they gave that kind of a religious color to it. And this is what we call the encoding of Hindutva into the law. The kind of resistance that happened to it was incredible. Across the country, city after city, you had this thing called the Shaheen Bagh. It's like basically encampments. In one city, you'll have 50 encampments, 100 encampments. People just sitting there saying, till you take that law back, we're not going to stop protesting. And this happened throughout the country. And the consequence of that was that the union government, the federal government, could not implement that law till now. Of course, now just before the election, as a kind of a gimmick, they've tried to enforce it. But that's the kind of resistance, and it's primarily the Muslims, it's primarily the democratic left forces that objected to it. The third kind of thing that we saw, of course, was the workers, students, etc. So broadly, what I'm trying to say is that the resistance then came on the streets. The resistance was the people. And the political parties like us, we are from the streets, but we are also in parliamentary democracy. So we actually moved this thing of trying to bring together all the parties, some kind of a united front to ensure some setback to the BJP in the electoral front. Luckily, that's happened. In the elections that have just got over, the BJP has become now a party that does not hold the government by itself. It's not it's the largest party still, but it only can form the government along with 3 other parties. So that has meant that it has been pushed back a bit. It's a really huge setback, because their idea was that we're going to sweep these elections, we're going to come in, the constitution is going to be consigned to the dustbin, we are going to do what we want. But I think, all the parties together, these kind of oppositions, and it's broadly all the street mobilization that has facilitated the electoral debacle for the BJP. I think those are the struggles that we really, we need to keep taking forward, and that's what I would imagine is what is required in most of these regimes. I'd just like to end with 2-3 things, this First Nation, what I've been hearing, it's not a new thing to me. It's something that we read a lot. We're very concerned about what's happening with them. And I was talking to Sam also yesterday, and I was asking, what is it that's stopping this kind of a decisive struggle for justice for the First Nations? I'm unable to understand that till now. This is a liberal democracy. You can't cross the road without pressing a button. It's really clean, the streets. We were actually, and it's so few people. In fact, Elijah and myself, we were counting the number of people from the morning. And I think we came up with a number of some 50, and there's much more people in this room than we saw on the streets. So it really can't be a problem that, population, it's too... So for me, I think, these struggles are very crucial. If you want to prevent an erosion of democracy, if you want to retain any kind of faith in democratic values, then these oppressions that are staring you in the face, that are decimating, destroying a population, These are your battles. I mean, this has to be fought in a way that is decisive, that pulls these governments down to their knees. I'm sorry, I just needed to share this with you because this is something that's, that's troubled me deeply this time. I think there's several other things that we need to do. I'm not going to, Maria said, I'm not going to repeat that. I completely agree with her. Sticking to our agenda, we've now won 2 seats. We are also in parliament this time. After 35 years, our party has won 2 seats. And so we'll continue the battle. We'll be the opposition on the streets. We'll be the opposition on the roads as well. That, those are things that I completely agree with her. This entire thing of unity and fighting. That's how these united fronts will have to operate. But I think, no doubt, we really need to think about how you protect the gains that you've already had in democracies such as yours, and then how do we ensure that we actually reach that idea that we have of a proletarian democracy. How do we actually realize that? What are the struggles that we need to build for that? I think ultimately those are the paths that we need to know to go by. So thank you. I really am very grateful to all of you for this opportunity, especially Sam and Fred for being extremely patient with all my queries on how to get to Australia. It's very difficult for a colored person to come to Australia. I mean, it's not at all easy. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Clifton. That was great to hear from you. And we're going to have we've got what's that? We've got about 15 minutes or so for questions that you might like to ask. And you know what? I'm not going to take any of that time up. So what we're going to do is we're going to take three comments, questions, and then we will hear from the panelists. I might. Okay. Jacob and Kyle and Sam. After that. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me? All right, so it's Jacob here, and both Marianne's and Clifton's presentations were excellent, and I think they kind of have set a kind of good framework on how we kind of respond to this kind of global phenomena of the rise of the far right. And I guess one comment I kind of want to make, which I think in a sense both Clifton and Marianne probably did cover in a sense in your presentation, but I guess one of the kind of challenging kind of questions to kind of deal with, especially in the context of the fact that the far left is quite weak, which is how there's a lot of people are quite scared. Like a lot of liberal-minded people are really scared about this rise of the far right. People are very concerned that Donald Trump is likely to win, especially after that presidential debate, to win a second term. And of course, one of the big concerns about Trump getting a second term is the Republicans have a whole plan to take power and government. And essentially what they'll do is they have ideas like, we will basically dismiss the whole education service and replace it with our political appointees. That's a very kind of scary development in a lot of ways. But of course, one of the questions that sort of gets answered is that because the whole lie, I guess, of liberal democracy is that we all apparently voted for this. There's this whole kind of understanding that, if people are voting for people like Trump or Modi, there must be something fundamentally wrong about the kind of general population. And I think the principled response that we have to have as a socialist is we actually have to really acknowledge, well, the first point I would like to say is when it comes to fascism, the social base of fascism generally isn't the working class as such. It's generally the kind of petty bourgeois and the ruling class kind of capitalist kind of elements. But of course, there are working class people, undeniably, who do get sucked into far right ideas. And I guess, how do we sort of explain it? But I think the kind of principle we do have to have is it's very much due to the kind of unevenness and the disempowerment that people feel towards capitalism. Like we have this experience in the Palestine movement. They are people who are coming into the movement with very conservative ideas about society, but they then have a very progressive idea that this genocide in Gaza is a terrible thing. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised in the United States if there's a lot of people who are angry about the fact that Joe Biden has literally armed Israel in this genocide, and they have illusions in this idea that Trump would represent some kind of progression. Like, that's the kind of confusion and the disempowerment that capitalism brings in our society. And I think it very much does come from the fact there's the decline of the trade union movement, the decline of kind of collective organisation. Really, it's that kind of conscious raising that we have to do. And I guess to kind of end on the kind of last point, there was this one interview we did in 2017 with this left-wing kind of activist, which was in the context of Milo Yiannopoulos coming to Australia. Now, in the context of Melbourne, most of the counter-protests against someone like Milo Yiannopoulos is by just the far left. It's just the socialists, the anarchists, who kind of all come together. Now, this guy, Anthony Kelly, in his interview, he said that, what actually we need is, if someone like Milo Yiannopoulos is spreading hateful ideas, comes to our idea, it actually should be the whole society, the whole working class who should be coming up and saying, this is not okay. And that is really the kind of politics of solidarity that is the best kind of counter to the kind of far right. And I think that's, in a sense, that's how you can confront the kind of unevenness and the confusion of the working class and the susceptibility of their idea to the far right.
Hello. Sorry, I forgot to say some notes here. So this session will be live streamed, so please be aware of that when you're making your question. It will be filmed and go on YouTube. And I'll give, so 3 people, and try and keep it within 3 minutes. And so, no, and yeah. So Alex, you're up. There you go. Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, sorry. Calvin, sorry.
First of all, I'm like Muslim and good believer practicing Islam. But my question is the right wing is fighting in the name of God? And we are the devil people? This is a question I'm asking about the Trump campaign, about Modi, about Netanyahu. When I read like the Hindu books, like Veda or Karma, there isn't something to kill the other, the non-Hindu. When I read the Bible or Torah, there isn't something what's Netanyahu and Trump talking about killing the Palestinian so that God will be happy. It's remind me about the Crusader when they come from Europe to occupy the Middle East, and they say, we are coming here so that Jesus will come back, and Jesus is a fighter. Never I read about that Jesus is a fighter. My question is like, using these terms, make the popularity for them in the street and make them like, yeah, we are going to fight in the name of the God. We are the soul of the God and we need to make the God word. This is, you can hear it everywhere. But like the reality in 18th century, there was a movement for the occupation of the world. And this movement used Martin Luther ideology to say like, Jesus will not come back till the Christian occupied Palestine, which we call it the Zionist Christian, and then the Zionist Jewish movement take over about it. I was shocked about what I heard about Hindu, but like this is my question about us. Did you feel it when you talk in the road like, yeah, you are the devil one, you are just socialist? Sorry.
Get responses from Clifton and Mariana. Sam. You want to come up?
Apparently Mariana can't hear that microphone. So I had just a quick comment and a question. So the first one is, it seems to me this confronting the rise of the far right is still a little bit distant and abstract for us in Australia because it's not presented in Australia. I mean, of course, we do know that there are some small far right groups and neo-Nazi outfits, that sort of stuff, but it's not present on the political stage in the way it is in Western Europe or Brazil or India. So it still seems a bit distant for us, and I think that's both good and bad. I mean, It's bad in the sense that Australian capitalism doesn't need a far-right party at the moment. Like, it's getting what it wants out of Labor and Liberal totally adequately, you know? But we shouldn't delude ourselves that if Australia does face severe economic and social crisis, that there couldn't also be a collapse in legitimacy of mainstream politics of Labor and Liberal in this country, and that people will be angry and desperate and looking for someone to blame, and that the soil that the far right would grow in this country has been well and truly fertilised by, 3 decades of Islamophobia, refugee bashing, and the fact that the Labor Party and the unions have mostly gone along with that is the most damaging thing. I mean, the damage that creates for the future is massive, the danger that it creates. I don't think we can underestimate. So we can't rest on our laurels, because when that happens, there will be polarisation. People will go to the left and the right, but the right gets a head start because all their talking points have been mainstream media for the last 30 years. Okay, my question is this. I'm wondering if the commentators, both Clifton and Marielle, could talk about their experience of unexpected movements that have arisen of people who are angry with the system, who aren't traditionally allied with the left, and whether you've been successful in intervening in those. Because the one that I was thinking about was the Gilets jaunes or Yellow Vest movement in France, which was very much, even though our media like to show pictures of riots in Paris, actually the centre of gravity of the Gilets jaunes movement in France was small town France. It was people, working part-time jobs, not unionised, like the single mum, disability carer, driving between 3 jobs, really angry about an increase in fuel tax, which was supposedly a Macron environmental measure, which is going to make her life really hard, So that was the layer of people. It was kind of small town, non-unionised, white working class who were really angry about these increases on taxes, these bullshit green taxes that were going to make their lives worse. And so, of course, it was very ideologically heterogeneous. And there were some sort of liberals whose response was just to poo-poo it, they're anti-Semitic, or they're racist, or they're this, or they're that. But the wellspring was very genuine, and so the left had to intervene in it and patiently start to move people. And the more it moved to the left, the less the National Front, or now Rassemblement National Rally, they became irrelevant. They were trying. Le Pen was there bobbing her head around at the blockades in the early days, but as time went on, became less and less relevant and less welcome. And we have had little signs of how that can happen in Australia as well. I remember when Pauline Hanson is nothing like Le Pen. Both in oratory skill or smarts or the size of her movement. But I remember when she first came onto the scene, and everyone was talking about Pauline Hanson, and then in 1998 the Patrick's dispute happened. And it was the biggest issue in Australian politics, and all of a sudden, Pauline Hanson had nothing to say. And the same thing happens in France. As soon as there's a mass strike, all of a sudden Le Pen's got nothing to say. It becomes utterly irrelevant, That's really, that was a little diversion. But yeah, if the speakers could come back to the thing about unexpected movements that burst out onto the scene, because capitalism creates them, and whether you've been able to intervene in them successfully against the far right.
Thanks, Sam. Clifton, do you like to? You go first, because I think Mariana had a bit of trouble hearing the questions. Yeah.
I think really crucial kind of points that have been raised. Jacob's point about dismantling of this education system by Trump, what is being expected, and these are things. This kind of historical revisionism is part and parcel of any far right kind of a regime. So how you rewrite history, you reconstruct an history. There's an entire move to remove slavery from the textbooks in the US. In India, there's an entire move to remove any reference to riots and genocides that the Hindu right-wing groups have perpetrated on the Muslims from the textbooks. So this is part and parcel of that kind of a regime. So I'm really very glad that he spoke about it. But I think the point about who constitutes the support base, what is the social base for these kinds of movements, I think we'll have to, really face the bitter truth there. A large extent, it's also the base that we are working with. It is the people who are most, basically you're preying on the victims of economic liberalism. That's broadly what this is doing. And the people who probably should be most against this kind of regimes will also probably be the ones who kind of support it. And I think that's the crisis that we are all facing today. The second, I think the point that Sam made is really important. in terms of, there are going to be these kinds of spontaneous movements that happen all the time. And in our country, we witnessed this several times. I'll give it, there's just right now, as we speak, the moment that Modi came back to power, there is this entire kind of a scam that is broken out. So basically in India, if you want to join engineering or medical, you want to do medicine, you have these centralized kind of exams that take place. Previously, it was a state-driven thing. Now it's become centralized at what you call the federal level. There's a huge scam that's happened there, and you now know that the entire exams were fixed. So students by the thousands have lost their opportunity this year, sir, on the streets. And our organization, and we're trying to mobilize all the other progressive student organizations to lead these struggles. So obviously, at any given point in time, one does try to do. The farmers' movement, for instance, when it began, it was just a bunch of farmers who said, okay, we want to do this. But then our farmer organization, the other left farmer organizations, everyone kind of came together and gave it the correct kind of, the direction that it probably needed. Lastly, I think the point about, this is not about God. And this is not even a question of whether there's God or no God. The point is really, this is almost like, like Islamophobia, to hate every Muslim. You're creating an enemy. Like I said, even before anything happened, in India, for instance, in the 1930s and 40s, you started constructing the Muslim as being your enemy because there was some invader. Then you changed your arguments about them over a period of time. You're selling hatred. But that's really not the main point. Like, I know I'm a Christian only because there's a right wing in India. Otherwise, I'm a communist, I'm an atheist. But it is like that, that's the nature of religion. And obviously, that is a problem. But it is very difficult to be a Muslim today. I don't think it's just in India. I think this is generally the case everywhere. The Islamophobia, and Islamophobia again is such a wide spectrum. From this small kind of prejudices and biases to the absolute kind of hatred resulting in the deaths and murders of Muslims. So it's that kind of a spectrum that you're working on. So obviously it is very different. But I've always believed that you don't answer back from that space. So there's a very interesting, Bhagat Singh is this revolutionary in India who was killed. He was hung by the British at the age of 23. Most of us, we draw inspiration from him. So Bhagat Singh actually has this very interesting kind of an article that he wrote, which basically is how do you fight communalism? And the point that he makes in that, which I think is really sensible, is that you need class consciousness to fight it. So even if you look at caste in India, our entire argument is, of course, you need to fight all of this. The only way to overcome these boundaries is through building class consciousness. And as Sam was saying, even Jacob was saying, the kind of struggles that you need to build, that is basically how you overcome any of these trends. Thanks.
Thanks, Clifton. Mariana.
Okay, so I'm sorry because I had some trouble hearing the first two questions, but I'll try to stick mostly to the third one because it is a very good one, because we have a very good example about this that happened in Brazil in 2013. That it is, we call the journeys of June 13, when massive demonstrations took all over the country. And back then, we were still under Dilma's president government. She was the successor of Lula's first government. So it was the Workers' Party that was governing Brazil. And we had these massive demonstrations against a rise of the price of the transport fares. So the bus fares started to, there was a rise on the transport fares in the beginning middle of the year. And suddenly it was like a spark of fire that incendiated all over the country, with mostly young people going to the streets, but also lots of, as the comrade said, like there was women going on the streets, like normal, regular people going to the streets. And they used to say it's not only of 20 cents issue, because back then the fare was going to rise 20 cents. So they said it is not only because of the 20 cents, because actually the prices were rising of everything, and there was a huge people were hugely unsatisfied about status quo, about the government, about how their lives were going, and that was something that was really unpredicted, how it really became the most, by far, huge demonstrations that happened in Brazil. Still now, we hadn't had anything like that happen in 2013. And that was something that really divided the left, and it still keeps dividing the left. So last year, we completed 10 years from the demonstrations, and we had a lot of debates regarding that time, because the center left, the PT, the Workers' Party, they really didn't want to hear what people was speaking on the streets. So they tried to ignore it, and they could not dialogue with the demands of the streets. So they tried as soon as they could to overcome it by trying to stop the protests. And on the other hand, the far right, rapidly they saw that was a space that they could grow, but also the radical left occupied the streets. We, as the left sector of PSOL, we were obsessed on being on the demonstrations and building it and being on the streets and being with the youth. And the result of that, it was that the far right and the far left could grow from this process. So after that, PT and the center left tried to build a discredit on the process, trying to say that that was the embryo of Bolsonaro. And they tried to say that that episode was when the far right started. And we still discuss this inside the left, because we definitely don't believe that all that massive amount of people that were going on the streets were people who had beliefs on the right. They weren't people with right-wing opinions. They were just regular people that was fed up of everything that was going on. But the radical sectors, even to the right or to the left, they could dialogue with that feeling that things needed to change. So for us, it was a very important process where we definitely grew up from it. So since then, we have a lot of activists that were part of that process, and they are now leaderships and members of a party, and they really started their militance at that time. So it is something that we still put a lot of value of that process, because we believe that us, as the left, we absolutely cannot be afraid of the streets. We absolutely cannot be afraid of mobilization, because sometimes people are going on the streets because they're just tired of how the capitalist system is working. So we have to be on the streets, and we have to talk to them, and we have to try to connect to their unsatisfaction, and we have to try to, as the comrade said, bring class consciousness to this process and make them to advance. So I think that's how we can dialogue with the unsatisfaction that is generalized in moments of capitalism crisis. So I think it's an example of how we should deal with that.
Thank you so much. And another round of applause for both of our speakers today, Clifton and Mariana. Our next session is starting at 11:30. So in the main room here, we have Suharto's Lingering Shadow, Human Rights in Indonesia and West Papua after Prabowo's election. We're going to have to the right, oh wait, that's not it. The other workshop is Media Activism 101, don't hate the media to be the media. That's true, right? And lastly, for anyone who is interested in finding out more about ecosocialism, just in the room next to us. Okay, so that other workshop, which one's here? Indonesia's here. Yeah. All right, we did it. Okay, thanks guys, that's amazing. Thank you.